Melodrama.
The goal of this project is to have an interactive multi-user instrument which allows you to create like different soundscapes within like different large spaces, so like spaces like stairwells or big tunnels or hallways.
November graveyard. The scene stands of untenanted air. And emerald with its grasses. However, the dread
I achieved this by utilizing Firebase for real-time data interaction, and then I used the Tone.js library for the audio. So as you see here, each player has a frequency, and then whether or not they've clicked the player button, a unique ID to identify them, and then a value to see whether they are currently playing an oscillator sound or not. And then every player is assigned a random name consisting of an adjective and then an animal. Then this defines the type of oscillator they have in their volume. And then these are parameters to help with playing different samples. So these samples could either be played for each player as a host, or the player themselves can play each sample. Alright, so now I'll just walk you through the JavaScript that I wrote to achieve this. Starting from the top, this chunk of code here is the Firebase config, and this just tells our app how to interact with our real-time database. This is an array of different notes and their corresponding frequencies, and we can change the octave of all the notes in this array by updating this octave variable. This here is how each user gets their random name, consisting of adjective and an animal. And this is an array of random samples that are meant to be triggered on random players' devices. And this is the code to select the random player and play the random player. And this is controlled by the transport, which I can talk about later. So this is a sample bank of all of the sound files that are meant to be triggered by the host and played globally for all the users at once. And these are all set to loop infinitely. Each user has an oscillator that is by default a sawtooth wave type. So when somebody connects to the website, they're first authenticated through Firebase, and after they are authenticated, then they are added to the list of players in the JSON, and their values are set to these default values. Here we have a listener which listens for updates on those values in the database. So this one specifically looks for changes in the oscillator. So this will change the oscillator type and frequency, pitch, or volume, depending on if that's updated by the host or the player themselves. This here handles the global samples, which are controlled by the host. So it just looks for which sample is playing, and if that value is set to true, then every user's device starts playing that sample. This is the array that stores all of the player's data, and that is retrieved from Firebase. So When somebody first enters the site, they are prompted to either become a host or a player. So if they click the host button, there's a set of functions that are triggered. And same if they click the player button, there's another set of functions that are triggered. And also the CSS and HTML are updated accordingly. So for instance, if the host button is clicked, then the render player list function is called. And this function is just responsible for creating an interface for each player that's currently connected. So you can change things like their pitch or their volume and if their oscillator is playing or not. When the player button is clicked, the setup audio visualizer function is called. This function is responsible for creating the audio visualizer for each player's oscillator. And it works by using the Tone.js analyzer method, which basically just it looks at the signal from the oscillator and extracts waveform data from it using a fancy algorithm called a fast Fourier transform. So this data is stored in a buffer, and then that buffer is read from and is drawn in real time on a HTML canvas. These are just start and stop buttons for the host's oscillator. And then this is an array of different chords and then the different frequencies or pitches that are in that chord. And this array is used in the setup chords function, which is called when the host button is clicked. And so for each chord button that the host has, there's an event listener that's added, and it looks for which chord was played, and then it goes through each player that is currently connected and updates their oscillator frequency to one of the frequencies within this. And another function that's called when you click the host button is the global control function. So this just gives you the ability to start and stop all of the player's oscillators at once. And this also gives you the ability to switch the global samples on and off. And then this is a bank of samples here that the player has access to and can play with buttons displayed on their screen. So this down here is the Tone.js transport, and this basically is a metronome that you can change the BPM of, and on every beat you can have it trigger something. So here I'm having it play a sample on a random player's device, a sample selected from the random samples array. And that is pretty much it.